You've felt it, haven't you? That persistent sense that conventional Christianity is missing something crucial. There's a reason Jesus spoke in riddles about having a single eye that fills your body with light. Taken literally, this makes zero sense, but as anatomical code, everything changes. Buried deep within your brain sits a pine cone-shaped gland that every ancient civilization knew about. The Egyptians called it the seat of the soul. Hindus mapped it as the third eye chakra. Buddhists depicted it in countless temple carvings. Yet somehow, modern Christianity conveniently forgot this organ even exists. This isn't coincidence. Your pineal gland produces DMT, the same molecule that creates near-death experiences and mystical visions. It's literally your biological gateway to higher consciousness. The same states Jesus accessed and taught others to reach. You didn't stumble across this information by accident. Something inside you remembers what humanity was meant to know. By the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly what Jesus meant when he said, "Those who have eyes to see." When Jesus stood before the religious authorities and declared, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," the Pharisees were outraged. They'd spent 46 years building that magnificent structure, and here was this radical teacher claiming he could rebuild it in 3 days. Impossible. But John's Gospel reveals the profound truth they missed entirely. He was speaking of the temple of his body. This wasn't just a clever metaphor about resurrection. Jesus was revealing one of the most suppressed truths in human history, that your physical body is the living temple of divine consciousness. Every human being carries within their anatomy the exact blueprint of sacred architecture that the ancients understood but modern religion has systematically erased. Let me show you something that will change how you see yourself forever. The ancient Jewish temple wasn't just a building. It was a precise map of human consciousness, encoded in stone and gold. When the temple builders received their instructions, they were creating an external representation of an internal reality that exists within every person walking this earth. Start with the Holy of Holies, the most sacred chamber where only the high priest could enter once a year. This innermost sanctuary sits at the exact center of your skull, housing your pineal gland, that pine cone-shaped mystery we explored in our first discussion. The Israelites placed the Ark of the Covenant in this space, believing it contained the direct presence of God. Your pineal gland serves the identical function, acting as the seat of your divine connection, the place where heaven meets earth within your own biology. The temple's golden lampstand, the menorah, was commanded to burn continuously, never to be extinguished. This eternal flame represents the inner light of your pineal gland, the bioluminescent capacity that modern science has only recently discovered. Ancient peoples knew this light must never go dark, understanding that maintaining this inner radiance was essential for spiritual awakening and direct divine communication. Move down to the altar of sacrifice, where offerings were burned and transformed. This corresponds precisely to your heart center, not just the physical organ, but the energetic hub where emotional transformation occurs. Just as the ancient priests offered sacrifices on that altar, you perform the same sacred work when you surrender lower emotions like fear, anger, and resentment, transforming them into love, compassion, and wisdom. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The temple's architecture included a vertical axis connecting earth to heaven, and your body contains the identical structure. Your spine serves as Jacob's ladder, that biblical vision of angels ascending and descending between realms. Every vertebra represents a rung on this ladder of consciousness, and the cerebrospinal fluid flowing through your spinal column carries the same sacred energy that Jacob witnessed moving between dimensions. The ancient mystery schools, from Egypt to Greece to the Essene communities, taught these anatomical correspondences as fundamental spiritual knowledge. Students learned to work with their bodies as living temples, activating specific centers and pathways to achieve direct divine experience. This wasn't theoretical theology. It was practical neurology combined with spiritual technology. So what happened? Why did this knowledge disappear from mainstream Christianity? The answer reveals one of history's most devastating cover-ups. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity in the 4th century, they faced a serious problem. A religion teaching that every individual carries the divine temple within their own body creates a population that doesn't need external religious authority. People who understand their bodies as sacred architecture don't require priests to mediate their connection to God. The institutional church systematically removed these teachings, replacing embodied spirituality with abstract doctrine. Instead of learning to activate your inner temple, you were taught to worship in external buildings. Instead of discovering the Christ consciousness within your own pineal gland, you were told to believe in a historical figure who lived 2,000 years ago. This wasn't accidental. Religious institutions maintain power by positioning themselves as necessary intermediaries between you and the divine. The moment you realize that your body contains everything needed for direct spiritual experience, their control system collapses. Take a moment right now and place your hand on your heart. Feel that rhythm, that constant sacred drumbeat. Now declare out loud, I am the temple. Say it again, I am the temple. How does that feel? Revolutionary? Heretical? That reaction itself reveals how deeply this suppression has affected your relationship with your own divine nature. The early Christian mystics understood this truth completely. They practiced what scholars call somatic theology, spirituality rooted in bodily experience rather than mental belief. They knew that salvation wasn't something that happened to you after death. It was a biological activation available in this lifetime through your physical form. Some of the most detailed temple correspondences are too sensitive for public platforms and could trigger automatic censorship. That's why we share our most profound research exclusively through our free Insights Academy newsletter, where subscribers also receive a complimentary copy of the Kybalion for a limited time, the foundational text of Hermetic wisdom that connects these ancient teachings. Consider the implications of what we're discussing. If your body truly functions as a living temple, then every cell becomes sacred space. Your breath becomes prayer. Your heartbeat becomes sacred rhythm. Your nervous system becomes the communication network between human and divine consciousness. This understanding transforms everything about how you approach spiritual development. Instead of seeking God in external locations, you begin the inner journey of temple activation. Instead of waiting for salvation from outside sources, you start working with the divine architecture already present in your anatomy. The pineal gland serves as the sacred lamp of this temple, the eternal flame that must never be extinguished. But here's what the ancient teachings reveal. This lamp can dim through neglect, toxification, and spiritual disconnection. It can also be rekindled, brightened, and activated through specific practices that work with your body's temple design. Modern humans walk around carrying cathedrals within their skulls, while believing themselves to be separate from the divine. We house the most sophisticated spiritual technology ever created, while searching for God everywhere except where it actually resides. Jesus wasn't speaking metaphorically when he identified his body as the temple. He was revealing the fundamental truth of human design, that consciousness itself has anatomical correlates, that spiritual experience has biological foundations, and that divine connection operates through specific physiological pathways. Your body isn't just the house you live in. It's the sacred architecture through which infinite consciousness experiences itself in physical form. And at the center of this living temple sits a small, pine cone-shaped gland that holds the key to everything the ancients called enlightenment, Christ consciousness, and divine awakening. The question isn't whether you have access to this sacred technology. The question is whether you're ready to remember how to use it. Deep inside your brain, nestled at the exact geometric center, sits a tiny pine cone-shaped structure about the size of a grain of rice. This is your pineal gland, and it represents one of the most fascinating intersections between cutting-edge neuroscience and ancient spiritual wisdom that you'll ever encounter. Here's what makes this gland absolutely extraordinary from a purely scientific standpoint. It contains photoreceptive cells, the exact same light-sensing cells found in your eyes. Think about that for a moment. Why would evolution place cells designed to detect light in the deepest, darkest part of your brain, completely sealed off from any external light source? Unless, of course, we're designed to perceive a different kind of light altogether. Modern science has documented this phenomenon extensively. These photoreceptive cells, called pinealocytes, contain the same rhodopsin proteins that enable vision in your retinas. But unlike your eyes, which detect reflected photons from the physical world, these cells appear designed for an entirely different purpose. The great philosopher René Descartes, who spent years studying anatomy, declared the pineal gland to be the seat of the soul, the one place where the immaterial mind interfaces with the physical brain. What Descartes intuited through careful observation, ancient cultures knew with absolute certainty. The Egyptians symbolized this gland as the Eye of Horus, that iconic symbol you see throughout their temples and papyri. But this wasn't mere symbolism. The Eye of Horus, when overlaid on a cross-section of the human brain, maps perfectly onto the pineal gland and surrounding structures. The Egyptians were creating anatomical diagrams disguised as religious symbols. In Hindu tradition, this same gland corresponds to the Ajna chakra, the third eye located between the eyebrows. Sanskrit texts describe it as the center of intuitive wisdom and spiritual insight. Tibetan Buddhism calls it the Eye of Consciousness. Remarkably, every major mystical tradition has identified this same anatomical structure as the gateway to expanded awareness. From a biochemical perspective, your pineal gland serves as your body's master clock, producing melatonin in response to darkness and regulating your circadian rhythms. But here's where conventional science hits a wall. The gland produces melatonin in quantities far exceeding what's needed for sleep regulation. It also synthesizes compounds like dimethyltryptamine, DMT, often called the spirit molecule for its profound consciousness-altering properties. Dr. Rick Strassman's groundbreaking research at the University of New Mexico demonstrated that the pineal gland releases massive amounts of DMT during birth, death, and near-death experiences. This isn't speculation, it's documented, peer-reviewed science. Yet mainstream medicine largely ignores these findings because they point towards something that challenges materialist assumptions about consciousness. The tragedy is that for most people living in modern society, this remarkable gland becomes calcified and largely dormant by adulthood. Fluoride in water supplies, processed foods, artificial lighting, and electromagnetic radiation all contribute to calcium phosphate deposits that literally turn your pineal gland into stone. Autopsies reveal that many adults have pineal glands so calcified they show up as bright white spots on brain scans. But throughout history, mystics who maintained active pineal glands reported strikingly similar experiences. Christian contemplatives like Meister Eckhart described perceiving an inner light during deep prayer. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote extensively about visions and mystical unions accompanied by brilliant illumination. Hindu sages speak of the light of 1,000 suns experienced during samadhi. Buddhist masters describe the clear light of awareness that becomes visible in advanced meditation states. These weren't metaphorical descriptions. Halos in religious art weren't symbolic representations of holiness. They depicted actual light phenomena witnessed around individuals with highly active pineal glands. Byzantine artists painted from direct observation, documenting the luminous fields they saw surrounding awakened teachers and saints. Consider the remarkable consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. Sufi mystics in medieval Persia, Tibetan yogis in mountain caves, and Christian hermits in Egyptian deserts all described identical experiences of inner light, expanded awareness, and direct spiritual perception. The common factor wasn't their beliefs or practices, it was the activation of the same neurological structure. When Jesus spoke about the single eye that fills the body with light, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. In the Gospel of Matthew, he states, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." This describes a precise physiological process. When the pineal gland activates, practitioners report their entire being flooded with luminous awareness. The Gnostic Gospels make this connection even more explicit. The Gospel of Thomas quotes Jesus saying, "When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, then you will enter the kingdom." This describes the pineal gland's function as the bridge between inner and outer perception, between material and spiritual dimensions of experience. Let's explore this connection directly. Close your eyes and bring your attention to the center of your head, slightly above and behind your eyebrows. Don't strain or force anything, simply rest your awareness in this space. You might notice warmth, tingling, or a subtle pressure. Some people experience pulsing sensations or the perception of gentle light, even with eyes closed. This isn't imagination, you're beginning to activate dormant neural pathways connected to your pineal gland. With consistent practice, these sensations become more pronounced. Many practitioners report experiencing colors, geometric patterns, or luminous phenomena during meditation. These are documented effects of pineal activation, not hallucinations or wishful thinking. The scientific literature contains hundreds of studies documenting increased pineal activity during meditation, prayer, and other contemplative practices. EEG readings show distinctive brainwave patterns, while biochemical analysis reveals elevated levels of endogenous compounds associated with expanded states of consciousness. What's remarkable is how this ancient wisdom perfectly aligns with modern neuroscience. The pineal gland sits at the exact center of the brain's limbic system, connected to every major neural network. It receives direct input from the visual cortex, influences the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, and sends projections throughout the cerebral cortex. Anatomically, it's positioned to serve as a master control center for consciousness itself. As we continue this journey together, I encourage you to begin paying attention to this space within your own head. Notice what you experience during quiet moments, especially in the early morning or late evening when melatonin production naturally peaks. You're beginning to awaken a capacity that every human being possesses, the same capacity that allowed mystics throughout history to access profound states of spiritual awareness and direct inner knowing. The ancient teachings weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated instruction manuals for activating the most advanced aspects of human neurology. Your pineal gland isn't just an evolutionary remnant. It's a doorway to the expanded consciousness that represents your birthright as a human being. Picture this. You're living in 1st century Jerusalem, and the temple isn't just a place of worship, it's the economic heart of an empire. Every sacrifice, every ritual cleansing, every religious ceremony generates revenue. The priests don't just hold spiritual authority, they control a massive financial machine that funnels wealth upward while keeping ordinary people in a cycle of spiritual debt. Then along comes this carpenter from Nazareth who says something that threatens to bring the whole system crashing down. The kingdom of God is within you. Do you realize what those 6 words meant to the established order? Jesus wasn't just offering spiritual comfort. He was announcing economic revolution. If the divine presence lives inside every person, if you can commune directly with the sacred without intermediaries, then what do you need priests for? What's the point of temple taxes, animal sacrifices, or elaborate rituals performed by a religious elite? The temple system required people to believe they were separated from God, that they needed someone else to bridge that gap. Jesus demolished that entire premise with his teaching about the inner kingdom. But here's where the story takes a dark turn that most of us never learned in Sunday school. For the first 3 centuries after Jesus' death, his followers actually lived this teaching. The early Christian communities were filled with mystics who practiced direct communion with the divine. The Gnostics, whose name literally means those who know, taught that every human being carries a spark of divine consciousness. The Desert Fathers retreated to caves and wilderness to activate what they called the eye of the heart, their term for inner spiritual sight. These weren't fringe groups. They were mainstream Christianity, preserving Jesus' actual message about human divinity and inner awakening. Their texts overflowed with instructions for accessing what we now recognize as higher states of consciousness through the very practices we explored in previous sections: meditation, contemplation, and activation of the spiritual centers within the body. The Gospel of Thomas, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, records Jesus saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." The Gospel of Mary describes Mary Magdalene teaching the disciples about receiving visions through the mind rather than the soul or spirit, pointing to specific practices for inner awakening. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts. They were instruction manuals for consciousness expansion. But then something catastrophic happened. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, and by 380 CE, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Suddenly, the faith that had threatened imperial power structures was being absorbed by those very structures. The Romans understood something crucial. If you can't destroy a revolutionary movement, co-opt it. The transformation was swift and brutal. Church councils were convened to determine orthodox doctrine, and guess what didn't make the cut? Any teaching that suggested humans could access divinity directly. The texts that emphasized the divine spark within each person were labeled heretical. The practices that activated inner spiritual sight were condemned as dangerous. In place of Jesus' message about human divinity, the institutionalized church constructed an entirely different narrative. Original sin replaced the divine spark. Human unworthiness replaced inherent spiritual potential. The need for institutional salvation replaced the teaching that the kingdom was already within you. This wasn't accidental. Every aspect of this doctrinal shift served political control. Tell people they're born broken, and they'll seek external fixing. Tell them they're inherently sinful, and they'll accept punishment as deserved. Tell them salvation comes only through institutional channels, and they'll remain dependent on those institutions. The psychological impact is staggering. Imagine growing up believing you carry divine light within you, that you have direct access to infinite wisdom and love, that your consciousness is a sacred gift capable of communion with the highest truths. Now imagine instead growing up believing you're fundamentally flawed, that your natural impulses are sinful, that you need someone else's permission to approach the sacred. Which version creates confident, spiritually empowered individuals? Which creates compliant, dependent followers? The church fathers weren't stupid. They recognized that Jesus' actual teaching was incompatible with hierarchical control. If everyone can access the divine directly, if the kingdom of heaven is truly within each person, then religious institutions become unnecessary. Priests become obsolete. The entire economic model of organized religion collapses. So they buried it. Libraries were destroyed. Texts were burned. Mystics were persecuted. The Gnostic Christians were hunted down and eliminated. The Desert Fathers were marginalized. Within a few centuries, Christianity had been transformed from a revolutionary spiritual practice into a tool of social control. The suppression was so thorough that most Christians today have never even heard of the Gospel of Thomas, despite it potentially being older than the canonical Gospels. They don't know that early Christian communities practiced meditation and contemplation as core spiritual disciplines. They've never learned that their own tradition originally taught human divinity rather than human depravity. But here's what the institutional church couldn't completely erase: the longing for direct spiritual experience. That's why millions of people today feel drawn to Jesus' message but trapped by traditional religion. They sense the authentic spiritual power in his teachings, but they can't reconcile it with doctrines that make them feel small, guilty, and dependent. Deep down, something in us recognizes that we weren't meant to beg for scraps of divine love from religious authorities. We weren't meant to surrender our spiritual power to intermediaries. The part of us that lights up when we read "The kingdom of God is within you" isn't responding to pretty poetry, it's recognizing truth. This is why you're here, isn't it? Something inside you knows that the sacred isn't locked away in distant heavens, requiring elaborate rituals and institutional approval to access. Something in you recognizes that the divine presence Jesus spoke about isn't separate from your own deepest nature. The church buried these teachings because they knew that awakened humans don't make obedient subjects. People who understand their own divine nature don't accept being told they're worthless sinners. Individuals who can commune directly with infinite consciousness don't need religious middlemen taking a cut of their spiritual experience. The question isn't whether these teachings are true. Your own inner knowing can verify that. The question is what you're going to do with this recognition that you've been systematically separated from your own spiritual inheritance. Because once you understand how deliberately these teachings were suppressed, once you see how the original message of human divinity was replaced with doctrines of unworthiness and dependence, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to accepting spiritual limitation as normal or necessary. The kingdom really is within you. It always has been. And that truth is exactly as revolutionary today as it was 2,000 years ago. When Jesus stood outside Jairus' house and heard the mourners wailing, he said something that made everyone laugh at him. "The child is not dead, but sleeping." They mocked him because they thought he was in denial about the obvious reality of death. But Jesus wasn't confused about what he was seeing. He was revealing something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Later, when his friend Lazarus died, Jesus used the same language. "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." His disciples, missing the deeper meaning, replied, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." So Jesus had to speak plainly, "Lazarus has died." But notice he returned to the sleep metaphor when describing what he was about to do, awaken him. This wasn't poetic language or gentle euphemism. Jesus was describing death from the perspective of expanded consciousness, where physical death is simply a transition between states of awareness, much like falling asleep and waking up. He understood something about consciousness that modern science is only beginning to rediscover through research into the pineal gland and near-death experiences. Every night, your pineal gland demonstrates this principle. As darkness falls, this tiny pine cone-shaped gland begins producing melatonin, the hormone that doesn't just make you sleepy, it facilitates one of the most mysterious processes in human experience. Your consciousness separates from ordinary waking awareness and enters entirely different realms of reality through dreams, visions, and sometimes out-of-body experiences. Think about what actually happens when you sleep. Your body lies motionless, but your consciousness travels to places that don't exist in physical space. You have conversations with people who aren't there. You experience vivid scenarios that feel completely real while they're happening. Your mind processes information, solves problems, and sometimes receives insights that surprise you when you wake up. Where does consciousness go during these hours? What part of you is having these experiences? The pineal gland serves as the biological gateway for these consciousness transitions. Modern sleep research shows that during REM sleep, when dreams are most vivid, the pineal gland is highly active. It's not just producing melatonin, it's facilitating your consciousness's journey into non-physical dimensions of experience. This happens so naturally that we take it for granted, but it's actually one of the most extraordinary phenomena in human existence. Sleep serves as a nightly rehearsal for death. Every time you fall asleep, your consciousness demonstrates its ability to exist independently of ordinary physical awareness. You experience realities that aren't bound by the laws of physics. Time works differently. Space has no meaning. You interact with deceased loved ones, visit places from your past, or explore landscapes that exist nowhere on Earth. Then you wake up and remember, or don't remember, these journeys into expanded consciousness. Advanced practitioners throughout history have learned to access these same consciousness states while awake. Through meditation, contemplation, and inner awakening practices, they discover that the pineal gland can be activated without sleep. They experience the same separation of consciousness from physical awareness, the same access to non-physical dimensions, the same encounters with expanded reality, but with full conscious control and memory. This is what Jesus meant when he spoke of death as sleep. From the perspective of awakened consciousness, physical death is simply a more permanent version of what happens every night. The consciousness that travels in dreams, that experiences visions, that sometimes leaves the body during deep sleep. This consciousness continues after physical death because it was never entirely dependent on physical processes to begin with. The Apostle Paul understood this connection between sleep, death, and spiritual awakening. In his letter to the Ephesians, he wrote, "Awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light." Notice how he connects sleeping with being dead, and awakening with receiving spiritual illumination. He's describing the same process Jesus demonstrated, the movement from unconscious sleep-like existence to fully awakened consciousness. Most people live in what could be called a trance state. They're physically awake but spiritually asleep. They go through the motions of life without accessing the expanded consciousness that's available to them. They experience the nightly journeys of sleep but don't recognize these as glimpses of their consciousness's true nature. They fear death because they identify completely with physical existence, not realizing that their essential consciousness already demonstrates its independence from the body every single night. Jesus came to facilitate complete awakening, not just from physical sleep, but from the spiritual sleep that keeps people trapped in limited awareness. When he raised Lazarus, he was demonstrating that consciousness is not bound by physical death. When he spoke of his own resurrection, he was revealing the continuity of awakened consciousness beyond bodily existence. But more importantly, he was showing that this same awakening is available to everyone who learns to activate their inner spiritual faculties. The pineal gland holds the key to this awakening process. As we discussed earlier, This gland contains the same photoreceptive cells found in the eye, but instead of looking outward at physical light, it perceives the inner light of consciousness itself. When properly activated through spiritual practice, it becomes what mystics call the third eye, the organ of spiritual perception that allows direct experience of non-physical realities. You can begin working with this understanding tonight. As you prepare for sleep, place your attention gently on the area of your pineal gland, the geometric center of your head, slightly above and behind your physical eyes. Don't strain or force anything. Simply rest your awareness there with the intention of remaining conscious during the transition from waking to sleeping. Silently affirm, I will awaken, I will remember, I will be conscious in all states of being. This practice connects your daily sleep-wake cycle to the larger process of spiritual awakening. You're training your consciousness to remain aware during transitions between different states of being. You're developing the same faculty that allows experienced meditators to maintain awareness during deep meditative states, and that ultimately allows consciousness to navigate the transition of physical death with complete awareness and control. Understanding death as sleep reframes resurrection from a one-time historical event to an ongoing possibility for consciousness expansion. Every morning when you wake up from sleep, you're experiencing a form of resurrection, consciousness returning to physical awareness after journeying in non-physical dimensions. Every time you emerge from deep meditation with expanded understanding, you're experiencing resurrection. Every moment when spiritual insight illuminates your awareness, you're experiencing the same principle Jesus demonstrated at the tomb. This teaching transforms how you relate to both sleep and death. Sleep becomes a sacred practice, a nightly opportunity to explore the nature of consciousness itself. Death loses its terror because you recognize it as a familiar process you've practiced thousands of times. Most importantly, you realize that true awakening, the resurrection of consciousness from spiritual sleep to full spiritual awareness, is available right now, in this lifetime, through the proper activation of the spiritual faculties that lie dormant within your own brain. Tonight, begin this practice. Let your sleep become conscious. Let your awakening become complete. Picture this. The man revered by billions as the ultimate spiritual authority makes a statement so outrageous it should have shattered every religious framework ever built around him. In John 14:12, Jesus declares, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do." Greater works than Jesus? How is that even possible? We're talking about someone who allegedly walked on water, multiplied food, and raised the dead. What could possibly be greater than that? Unless Jesus wasn't positioning himself as the unreachable pinnacle of human achievement, but as the first successful prototype of what every human being could become. This statement becomes revolutionary when you realize Jesus wasn't seeking worshippers, he was creating a blueprint for replication. He wasn't saying, "Bow down to my uniqueness." He was saying, "Follow my example and surpass it." That's not the language of a deity demanding reverence. That's the guidance of a teacher, preparing students to exceed their instructor. Look at the progression Jesus outlined for humanity. He starts by calling people servants, then elevates them to friends, and finally promises they'll become co-heirs with Christ. This isn't religious hierarchy, it's a developmental roadmap for consciousness expansion. Each stage represents a deeper activation of that crystalline structure we've been discussing, your pineal gland awakening to its full potential. The servant stage represents basic spiritual infancy, following external rules and seeking approval. The friend stage involves direct communication and understanding. Remember, Jesus said, "I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you." This is pineal activation beginning to open inner channels of knowing. But the co-heir stage, that's full Christ consciousness, the complete realization that the same divine essence flowing through Jesus flows through you. When your pineal gland reaches optimal function, when that inner eye opens completely, you access the same field of infinite possibility that Jesus demonstrated. Consider his other revolutionary statements that the Church has spent centuries trying to soften or explain away. Ye are gods, from John 10:34. Not metaphorical, not aspirational, but a literal description of your dormant potential. The Father is in me and I am in you, from John 14:20. Again, not poetry, but precise instructions about the unified field of consciousness accessible through pineal activation. Jesus served as the first fruits, the initial successful demonstration of what becomes possible when human consciousness fully awakens. Every miracle he performed was essentially him saying, "This is your inheritance. This is what you're capable of when you remember who you really are." But here's where it gets interesting. The church had a choice: encourage people to follow Jesus' actual teachings about inner awakening and human potential, or create a worship system that keeps people spiritually dependent. Guess which one pays better and maintains institutional control? They chose worship over emulation, keeping billions of people in spiritual infancy rather than encouraging the maturation Jesus clearly intended. It's easier to manage a flock that believes they're inherently flawed and needs external salvation than to guide people toward recognizing their own divine nature. Yet throughout history, certain Christian mystics and saints broke through this programming and demonstrated extraordinary abilities. Saint Teresa of Avila experienced levitation during deep prayer states. Saint Joseph of Cupertino flew so frequently that church authorities banned him from public worship. Saint Padre Pio exhibited bilocation, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. These weren't random miracles granted by an external deity. These were natural results of pineal gland activation and expanded consciousness. These individuals, through intense inner practice, accessed the same states Jesus modeled. Their experiences align perfectly with what we know about DMT production, consciousness expansion, and the pineal gland's role as a bridge between dimensions. The greater works Jesus promised aren't necessarily about individual miraculous displays, though those remain possible. The truly greater work might be the collective awakening of humanity to its divine nature. Imagine millions of people simultaneously activating their pineal glands, accessing Christ consciousness, and operating from that expanded awareness. One awakened individual can transform thousands through their presence and example, but millions awakening together, that would indeed surpass anything one person could accomplish, no matter how remarkable. That's the greater work, not competing with Jesus' individual achievements, but fulfilling the collective potential he came to activate. Your brain contains the same neurological equipment Jesus accessed. Your pineal gland has the same capacity for DMT production and consciousness expansion. Your nervous system can handle the same frequencies of awareness he demonstrated. The only difference is activation level and conscious participation in the process. When Jesus said believers would do greater works, he wasn't speaking to some future generation of specially chosen individuals. He was speaking directly to you, right now, acknowledging the unlimited potential waiting within your own consciousness. The question isn't whether you're capable of these greater works. Jesus already confirmed that you are. The question is whether you're ready to move beyond worship into actual practice, beyond admiration into activation. This is why understanding pineal gland function becomes crucial. It's not just spiritual theory, it's the biological mechanism through which these expanded states become accessible. Jesus wasn't operating on some supernatural level unavailable to human beings. He was demonstrating optimal human function, showing what becomes possible when every aspect of your consciousness comes online. If you've made it this far, something inside you is stirring. The concepts we've explored about the single eye, the pineal gland, and Christ consciousness aren't just fascinating theories anymore, they're calling to something deeper within you. That restlessness you feel, that sense that there's more to discover, tells me you're ready for what comes next. We're moving from understanding to experience, from knowledge to activation. What I'm about to share with you represents the culmination of years studying ancient texts, working with mystics from various traditions, and personally exploring these practices. This isn't New Age fantasy or wishful thinking. The techniques you're about to learn have been quietly preserved by initiates for thousands of years, passed down through mystery schools, Gnostic communities, and contemplative orders that understood what Jesus really meant when he spoke of the kingdom of heaven being within. Before we begin, find yourself a space where you won't be disturbed. This could be a quiet corner of your bedroom, a peaceful spot in nature, or even your car during a lunch break. What matters isn't the location, it's your intention and openness to what wants to emerge. Sit comfortably with your spine naturally upright, not rigid, not forced, but aligned like a tree reaching toward light while staying rooted in earth. Close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Not the shallow breathing you've been conditioned to accept as normal, but the kind of breathing that reaches down into your belly and fills your entire torso. With each exhale, let go of the mental chatter, the to-do lists, the concerns about whether you're doing this right. There's no wrong way to approach your own awakening. Now, bring your attention to a point approximately 2 inches back from the center of your forehead, right in the geometric center of your head. This is where your pineal gland rests, that tiny pine cone-shaped organ the ancients called the seat of the soul. Don't worry if you can't feel anything there initially. Most of us have been living with this sacred center dormant for so long that it takes patience to reawaken it. Imagine a small flame appearing in this space, not with strain or effort, but with gentle invitation. Picture it as a golden flame, about the size of a candle's light, flickering softly in the darkness behind your eyes. Some people see blue light, others white or violet. Trust whatever appears for you. The color isn't what matters. It's the awakening of this inner luminosity that counts. With each breath, allow this flame to grow slightly brighter, not through force or visualization gymnastics, but through simple attention and breath. You're not creating this light. You're uncovering it, remembering it, allowing it to emerge from where it's always been waiting. This is the light Jesus spoke of when he said, "You are the light of the world." This is what he meant by the single eye being full of light. As this golden flame stabilizes and brightens, begin to sense it expanding beyond its original small size. Let it grow to fill the entire space around your pineal gland, then gradually expand to illuminate your whole head. Feel this warm, intelligent light moving through your brain, activating neural pathways that have been dormant, awakening capacities you forgot you possessed. Notice any sensations as this happens. You might feel warmth, tingling, or a gentle pressure in your head. Some people experience a sense of expansion, as if the boundaries of their skull are becoming more spacious. Others feel energy moving down their spine or a deep sense of peace settling over them. All of these are normal responses indicating that dormant systems are coming online. Now allow this light to descend from your head into your throat area. Feel it illuminating your throat chakra, that center of authentic expression and truth-telling. Let the light continue downward into your heart space, filling your chest with the same golden radiance. This is where the Christ consciousness truly takes root, not in your head alone, but in the integration of mind and heart, wisdom and love. Continue guiding this light throughout your entire body. Let it flow down through your arms to your fingertips, down through your torso into your abdomen, your hips, your legs, all the way to the soles of your feet. You're not just visualizing now, you're activating your entire energetic system, awakening the light body that mystics throughout history have written about. Once your physical body feels filled with this golden radiance, begin extending the light beyond your skin. Imagine it creating a luminous field around you, expanding several feet in all directions. This isn't imagination, you're activating your electromagnetic field, your aura, the energy body that extends beyond your physical form. Ancient texts describe this as the resurrection body, the light body that transcends physical death. As you rest in this expanded state of luminous awareness, speak these words silently or aloud. I am awake. Feel the truth of this statement resonating through every cell. Then, the single eye is open. Sense the reality of this ancient capacity coming online within you. Finally, the Christ is alive in me, not as religious doctrine, but as lived experience of the divine consciousness that is your true nature. Remain in this state for as long feels natural. It might be 5 minutes or 20. There's no timer running, no goal to achieve other than familiarizing yourself with this inner luminosity that is your birthright. Some days the experience will feel profound and transformative. Other days it might seem subtle or even ordinary. Both are perfect. You're establishing a relationship with consciousness itself, and like any relationship, it deepens through consistent, patient attention. What you're experiencing isn't mere visualization or positive thinking. You're activating dormant neurological pathways, stimulating your pineal gland's natural production of consciousness-expanding compounds, and awakening energy systems that mainstream science is only beginning to understand. Recent research on the pineal gland's role in producing DMT, often called the spirit molecule, confirms what mystics have known for millennia. This tiny organ is indeed a gateway to expanded states of consciousness. The physical sensations you might experience, the warmth, tingling, pressure, or sense of expansion, indicate that real physiological changes are occurring. Your pineal gland is beginning to calcify less and function more optimally. Your brain's default mode network, which normally keeps you trapped in repetitive thought patterns, is being interrupted and reorganized. You're literally rewiring your consciousness. Here's something crucial to understand. Once you've activated this inner light, it never truly goes away. Life circumstances, stress, and the demands of modern existence might dim it temporarily, but the capacity remains. You've awakened something that was always there, waiting for your recognition and attention. Even if weeks or months pass without practice, you can return to this luminous awareness because it's not something you create, it's something you are. This practice connects you to an unbroken lineage of awakened beings throughout history. The Egyptian mystery schools taught similar techniques for activating the eye of Horus. Hindu and Buddhist traditions speak of awakening the third eye, or wisdom eye. Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, wrote about the why, wrote about Roin, one, eye of the soul through which divine union occurs. You're not learning something new, you're remembering something ancient and eternal. When Jesus gathered his closest disciples and shared teachings he didn't give to the crowds, this is what he was pointing toward. Not religious concepts or theological doctrines, but direct methods for awakening the divine consciousness within. The greater works he promised would come through this activation, not through belief alone, but through the actual awakening of capacities that transcend ordinary human limitation. As you slowly return your attention to your physical surroundings, know that something fundamental has shifted. You've tasted your true nature as beings of light and consciousness. You've activated the single eye that sees beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Most importantly, you've taken the first step toward embodying the Christ consciousness that represents humanity's next stage of evolution. Practice this activation daily, even if only for a few minutes. Your consistency matters more than the duration. Each time you return to this inner light, you're strengthening neural pathways and energy systems that support expanded awareness. You're becoming the change you wish to see in the world, one moment of awakened consciousness at a time. What if everything you've been taught about the second coming is keeping you from recognizing it's already happening? What if the very act of waiting for an external savior is the final barrier preventing you from stepping into the role you were always meant to play? The traditional interpretation has you scanning the skies, waiting for a figure to descend from the clouds while the real transformation is occurring in the space between your eyebrows. The coming in the clouds that mystics and prophets spoke of isn't about meteorological phenomena. It's about the luminous, cloud-like visions that flood your awareness when the pineal gland fully awakens. I've studied accounts from contemplatives across centuries, and the descriptions are remarkably consistent. When the single eye opens, people report seeing brilliant clouds of light, golden vapors, or what Ezekiel called the appearance of the brightness round about. These aren't hallucinations, they're the direct perception of consciousness itself, the very clouds of glory that represent divine presence in ancient texts. Think about how prophecy actually works. It operates simultaneously on multiple levels: historical, personal, and collective. The surface level speaks to external events that satisfy literal interpretations, but the deeper level reveals the inner transformation that each individual must undergo. The ultimate fulfillment isn't a cosmic rescue mission, it's humanity awakening to its own divine nature. Jesus made this abundantly clear when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you, not coming to you, not being built around you, within you, right now." Yet, institutional religion has convinced millions to keep looking elsewhere, to remain passive observers waiting for someone else to fulfill what can only be accomplished through your own consciousness. Here's what changes when you realize you're not waiting for the second coming. You are part of it. The psychological shift is profound. Instead of feeling helpless in the face of world events, you recognize your awakening as contributing to the collective transformation of human consciousness. Every moment you spend in the awareness you've been cultivating through the practices we've explored is literally fulfilling prophecy. The mass awakening of pineal glands represents the collective second coming. Each individual who activates their single eye adds to the morphic field of awakened consciousness that makes it easier for others to access these states. This is why spiritual breakthroughs often happen in waves throughout history. Consciousness is contagious. Look at the Gnostic communities of the early centuries. They understood that the Christ was a state of consciousness, not a person to worship. The Cathars in medieval France taught that each person carried the divine spark that could be awakened. The Sufis spoke of the perfect human who realizes their true nature. In every case, institutional powers moved swiftly to suppress these teachings because they threatened the control structure that depends on your spiritual dependence. The pattern repeats because the truth keeps emerging. Meister Eckhart was nearly condemned as a heretic for teaching that God's ground and the soul's ground are one ground. The Quakers were persecuted for insisting that everyone could experience direct divine communion. Even today, any teaching that empowers individual spiritual realization faces resistance from systems that profit from your sense of separation. But something unprecedented is happening now. The information age has made these hidden teachings accessible in ways that previous generations couldn't imagine. The very practices that were once confined to mystery schools and secret societies are spreading rapidly through networks that no institution can fully control. When you combine the ancient wisdom of pineal gland activation with modern understanding of neuroplasticity and consciousness research, you get a perfect storm for mass awakening. The techniques we walked through in the previous section aren't just personal development exercises. They're tools for participating in the prophetic transformation of human consciousness. I understand the resistance that might be arising as you consider this perspective. You might be thinking, who am I to claim this level of spiritual identity? Isn't this blasphemous or egotistical? But here's the crucial distinction. This isn't about claiming to be special or chosen above others. It's about remembering what you actually are beneath the layers of conditioning and limitation. The ego that worries about blasphemy is the same ego that keeps you small and separated from your true nature. The awakened consciousness recognizes that claiming your divine inheritance isn't arrogance, it's the humility to acknowledge what was always true. You're not becoming something you weren't. You're remembering what you forgot. This remembering process is accelerating globally. People are spontaneously experiencing pineal activation, having mystical experiences, and recognizing the Christ consciousness within themselves without any formal training. The collective field is reaching a tipping point where these awakenings become increasingly common and accessible. Your individual practice contributes to this collective awakening while simultaneously fulfilling your personal spiritual destiny. Every time you access the single-eye awareness, you're not just transforming your own consciousness, you're adding to the critical mass that makes these states available to others. The second coming isn't a future event you're waiting for. It's a present reality you're participating in. The question isn't whether you're worthy of this recognition. The question is whether you're ready to step fully into the role you came here to play. The practices we'll explore in our next section will show you how to stabilize these awakened states and integrate them into daily life, because recognizing your true nature is just the beginning. The real work is learning to live from this awareness consistently. The prophecy is being fulfilled through you. As you, in every moment, you choose consciousness over unconsciousness, presence over distraction, love over fear. This is how the kingdom of heaven comes to earth, not through external intervention, but through the awakening of those who remember who they really are. The moment your pineal gland activates and you glimpse that first flash of Christ consciousness, you might think you've arrived at some spiritual finish line. But here's what Thoth understood and Jesus demonstrated through his 3-year ministry. Awakening isn't a destination. It's the beginning of the most challenging and rewarding work of your existence. You're now carrying a flame that most of the world doesn't recognize, doesn't understand, and sometimes actively resists. Every day, you'll face the choice between dimming that light to fit in or burning brighter despite the discomfort it causes others. This is the path of the awakened temple, learning to be a beacon in a world that's forgotten how to see. Your pineal gland, now stirring from its fluoride-induced slumber, needs daily tending, like any sacred fire. The ancient Egyptian priests knew this. They didn't just activate the single eye once and walk away. They built entire lifestyles around maintaining its luminosity. You need that same dedication. Start each morning with 15 minutes of focused attention on the space between your eyebrows. Not meditation in the way most people think of it, sitting there hoping for something to happen. This is active communion with your inner divinity. Breathe directly into that crystalline chamber, visualizing pure white light energizing the sacred geometry within. Feel the slight pressure, the tingling sensation, sometimes even the subtle pulsing that indicates your pineal is responding. Your breath becomes your most powerful tool for maintaining activation. The ancients called it pranayama, the extension of life force, but they specifically understood that certain breathing patterns directly stimulate the pineal region. Try this. Inhale for 4 counts while focusing on drawing energy up your spine to the crown. Hold for 4 counts while concentrating on the pineal area. Then exhale for 6 counts while imagining light radiating from your third eye throughout your entire body. Do this cycle 21 times. Whenever you feel your connection dimming, the food you put in your body either supports or sabotages your awakened state. Fluoride, found in most tap water, conventional toothpaste, and processed foods, calcifies your pineal gland like rust on a sacred instrument. Switch to fluoride-free toothpaste, install a quality water filter, and read labels obsessively. The establishment didn't accidentally put a neurotoxin in your water supply, but it goes deeper than avoiding poisons. Your awakened pineal craves foods that vibrate at higher frequencies. Fresh fruits and vegetables, especially those rich in antioxidants like blueberries and dark leafy greens, seem to enhance pineal function. Raw cacao, not processed chocolate, contains compounds that support healthy pineal activity. Many awakening individuals report that reducing or eliminating meat consumption helps maintain clearer inner vision, though you'll need to discover your own body's wisdom on this. Sleep becomes sacred when you understand the pineal's role in producing both melatonin and DMT. Your awakened gland needs darkness, complete darkness, to function optimally. Cover every LED light, get blackout curtains, and honor the natural circadian rhythms that modern life has disrupted. Many people notice their most profound spiritual experiences occur during the hours between 2 and 4 a.m., when pineal activity naturally peaks. The real challenge isn't maintaining the practices, it's maintaining your sanity in a world that operates from fear, scarcity, and separation. While you're experiencing unity, abundance, and love, you'll watch people you care about making decisions from unconscious programming, and you'll feel called to help them see what you see. This is where discernment becomes crucial. Not everyone is ready for what you've discovered. Forcing your awakening onto others creates resistance and often damages relationships. Jesus himself said not to cast pearls before swine, not because some people are less valuable, but because timing and receptivity matter. Learn to recognize the difference between someone genuinely seeking truth and someone who just wants to argue or prove you wrong. When you do share, speak from your experience rather than trying to convince anyone of anything. Say, "I've found," instead of "you should." Share what's worked for you without making others wrong for their path. The light you carry will attract those ready to kindle their own flame. You'll also need to develop sophisticated discernment about your own experiences. Not every unusual sensation or intuitive hit comes from genuine pineal activation. Spiritual ego loves to masquerade as divine guidance. Real Christ consciousness makes you more humble, not more special. It increases your capacity for service, not your sense of superiority. Watch for the subtle ways your awakening might be creating separation from others. If you find yourself judging people as asleep or unconscious, you've slipped back into the very dualistic thinking that Christ consciousness transcends. The awakened heart sees the divine spark in everyone, regardless of their current level of awareness. Stress, fear, and anxiety act like clouds covering your inner Sunday. Modern life seems designed to keep you in these lower vibrational states. Develop practices for quickly returning to center when life's chaos threatens to dim your light. Some people use specific mantras, others focus on heart-centered breathing, and many find that simply asking, "What would love do here?" cuts through confusion. Find your tribe. Awakening can feel isolating when you're surrounded by people operating from completely different paradigms. Seek out communities, online or in person, where you can speak freely about your experiences without judgment or skepticism. These connections remind you that you're not crazy and provide support for the ongoing challenges of conscious living. Your awakened state carries responsibility. You become a bridge between worlds, helping to anchor higher consciousness in physical reality through every interaction. The way you treat the grocery store clerk, respond to traffic, or handle conflict at work becomes an expression of the Christ consciousness flowing through you. This isn't about perfection, it's about consistent practice. Some days, you'll feel deeply connected to your divine nature, and other days, you'll wonder if any of this was real. Both experiences are part of the journey. The key is returning to your practices, recommitting to your growth, and trusting the process even when you can't feel the results. You're not just awakening for yourself. Every person who activates their pineal gland and embodies Christ consciousness makes it easier for others to do the same. You're part of a collective awakening that's been prophesied for millennia. Your individual transformation contributes to the species-wide evolution that's already underway. The single eye you've opened will continue to see more clearly as you learn to live as the temple you've always been. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, you're not here by accident. You represent something specific, a particular type of seeker who's willing to move beyond the comfortable boundaries of conventional religion into the realm of direct spiritual experience. Most people turn away when confronted with teachings that challenge their fundamental assumptions about reality, but you're still here, which tells me something important about who you are. Throughout history, there's always been what mystics call the remnant, a small percentage of humanity that carries forward essential spiritual knowledge during dark periods of suppression and ignorance. These weren't necessarily the priests or the officially recognized religious authorities. Often, they were the ones working quietly in the background. The Gnostic communities preserving Christ's inner teachings, the Hermetic scholars maintaining Thoth's wisdom. Through the Middle Ages, the indigenous shamans protecting ancient activation practices despite centuries of persecution. You're part of that remnant. The very fact that these teachings resonate with something deep inside you indicates that you carry within your cellular memory the blueprint for awakening that has been passed down through countless generations of seekers. What makes our current era unprecedented is that we're witnessing the convergence of ancient wisdom with modern scientific understanding. For the first time in human history, we can explain neurologically what the ancients knew experientially. When Thoth spoke of the eye of Horus, and Jesus referred to the single eye, they were pointing to the same neurological reality that modern researchers are now mapping with brain imaging technology. The pineal gland's role in consciousness isn't mystical speculation anymore, it's measurable science. This convergence creates a unique opportunity for mass awakening. The knowledge that was once hidden in mystery schools and accessible only to a chosen few is now available to anyone willing to do the inner work. The internet, despite all its distractions, has become the great democratizer of spiritual wisdom. Ancient texts that were once locked away in Vatican vaults or Tibetan monasteries are now freely available. Meditation techniques that took years to learn from a master can be accessed instantly, but with this opportunity comes responsibility. As someone who's received these teachings, you become part of the transmission lineage. The awakening you experience doesn't exist in isolation. It creates ripple effects throughout the collective consciousness field. Every time someone successfully activates their pineal gland and stabilizes in Christ consciousness, it makes it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. This is how spiritual evolution actually works. It's not a random process where everyone suddenly wakes up simultaneously. It's more like reaching critical mass. Once enough individuals achieve stable awakening, it creates what Rupert Sheldrake called morphic resonance, making that state of consciousness more accessible to others. Think about it practically. When you're operating from an awakened state, people around you feel it, even if they can't articulate what's different. Your presence becomes a tuning fork that helps others remember their own divine nature. You become what the Gnostics called a pneumatic, one who carries the living spirit and can awaken it in others. This doesn't mean you need to become a teacher or start a spiritual movement. Often, the most powerful transmission happens through simply being authentically yourself, living from that activated state of consciousness in your daily interactions. When you respond to conflict with genuine compassion instead of reactivity, when you make decisions from inner wisdom rather than fear, when you maintain your center regardless of external chaos, you're demonstrating what's possible for human consciousness. However, I need to address something honestly. The initial stages of awakening can feel profoundly isolating. When you start seeing through the illusions that most people take for granted, when you're no longer satisfied with surface-level conversations about sports and weather, When you recognize the divine spark in everyone while they're still identifying with their ego personalities, it can feel like you're living in a different reality from those around you. This isolation is temporary, but it's real. The key is understanding that you're not actually alone. You're connecting with a vast network of conscious beings that exists across time and space. Every genuine mystic who ever lived, every person who successfully activated their inner Christ, every individual who achieved what the Egyptians called becoming a god, they're all part of the same consciousness field you're now accessing. Finding others on this path requires discernment. Not everyone who uses spiritual language has done the actual inner work. The spiritual marketplace is full of people selling awakening without having experienced it themselves. Trust your activated intuition. Genuine teachers and communities have a particular quality. They're more interested in empowering your direct experience than in gaining followers. They point you toward your own inner authority rather than creating dependency. The ultimate vision here transcends individual awakening. We're participating in nothing less than the evolution of human consciousness itself. For thousands of years, humanity has been trapped in what we might call beta consciousness, the survival, focused, ego-driven, separation-based awareness that created our current global crises. The activation of the pineal gland and the stabilization of Christ consciousness represents the emergence of what we could call gamma consciousness, unity-based, love-centered, wisdom-guided awareness. This isn't just spiritual theory. The challenges facing our species, environmental destruction, social inequality, the mental health epidemic, the breakdown of meaning and purpose, these can't be solved from the same level of consciousness that created them. They require the kind of integrated wisdom that emerges when the pineal gland is functioning optimally and the heart-mind connection is fully activated. Every person who completes this inner transformation becomes a living solution to humanity's collective problems. Not because they're trying to fix the world, but because they're embodying the consciousness that naturally creates harmony, sustainability, and genuine prosperity for all beings. Your journey to this teaching wasn't random. In a world of infinite distractions and endless entertainment options, something guided you here. That guidance came from your own higher self, the aspect of your consciousness that never forgot its divine nature and has been patiently waiting for you to remember. You're being called to participate in the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. Not as a passive observer, but as an active co-creator of the new paradigm of consciousness that's emerging on this planet. The ancient prophecies of both Egyptian and Christian traditions spoke of this time, when the hidden wisdom would be revealed and humanity would remember its true nature. That time is now. That calling is yours. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."